Speak louder? Okay. Yeah, so my name is Boris, and I'm going to be talking about scalable forms. So about me, I'm a lead developer at Trufla. I have a GitHub account there, there's my LinkedIn, there's me skiing. So I like challenges, development, and skiing, and one of the things about Trufla that's really great is it allows me to have a lifestyle. Everyone can pursue their passions and code at the same time. So this is a quick agenda, basically. Why JSON schema? What is it? The architecture, a bit of our own product, NGX True Forms, a bit of a demo, and then the future of it. So a lot of this is tailored around Angular 5, but it can be applied to other front-end technologies such as Vue or React or whatever. So why JSON schema? So we have technologies distributed to over 80 businesses across Canada and growing. And each one of these businesses has a need for custom forms, processes, and data points. A lot of the forms and data variations across businesses. So how they capture data, how they store it, how they validate it, it needs to be flexible so we can grow without rebuilding the application. So more or less, this is the old way you've probably seen forms. This is just a simple HTML tag. Got some basic information here, and we have a problem already when it comes to scaling. So it's web specific, it's static, it's inflexible, and it's error prone. So when you work with forms, which you've probably already done at some point, you know that there's the process of validations, labels, required fields, editing the data, populating the form back, and so on. Does everyone get so far? So what is JSON schema? Has anyone heard of JSON schema before? 1, 2, okay. So in the JavaScript world and the RESTful APIs, we communicate with JSON objects. So JSON schema is just another way to define data. Specifically from their website, it's a vocabulary or a dictionary that allows for you to annotate and validate JSON documents. So what does annotate mean? It means to describe the data that's coming in. So in this particular example, there's a title, and then it's a type of object, and then some of the properties we're collecting, and we're specific about their type. So in this case, it's a string, it's an integer, and then what are the required fields? And what does it validate? Well, it validates the data that's coming in. So these two put together essentially create a successful request to the API. So with the front-end applications, you have the client-side validation and server-side validation. And so regardless of the technology that you're using in your backend, whether it's PHP, Node, Java, or Swift, you can use the same validation technology to take the structure and validate it against the incoming data. So that's kind of a brief summary of it. And so your standard RESTful architecture is applications at the top. So iOS, Android, web, Internet of Things, and the next technology. Each one of those feeds into a standard API. So assuming there's some validation done at the top, there's going to have to be some validation at the bottom to ensure that the client is not using Postman or curl or something to bypass our client-side applications. So because this is not a school project, the data-savvy customer comes to us a lot and says, I changed my mind again, and I need to collect more data. So all of a sudden, you can see the problem here with the with the amount of technologies that need to change along with it. The application layer, the validation layer, and possibly the data structures. This is Trufla's architecture. So we take JSON schema into the applications via the API. And we use JSON schema to create forms that we present to the client. Each one of our libraries at the top, whether it's iOS, Android, or web, or whatever the next thing is, has its own layer for generating forms from the schema. And at the bottom layer, at the API level, we apply the scheme validation at the client server side as we do application side. So dynamic is hard. Building forms is pretty easy. Templated forms are really easy when we know what the fields are. But dynamic is pretty hard. So we built our own leveraging Angular 5 reactive forms. This doesn't mean there's not other solutions out there depending on different front-end technologies, but we have we wanted to support a lot of complex forms and take this connect this further into our applications. So the application team follows a single standard, which is the jsonschema.org. You can go to the URL and there is versions of JSON schema, standard fields, standard values, and so on. So how the process works, going back to that previous diagram that's bidirectional, is it starts with the API, which serves up the JSON schema, which is ingested by the application to generate the form, and then we go back and forth until that validation passes, back to the API, which can do further server-side validation, and then back into the database. Okay. Demo. So I'll keep this brief, assuming this all loads up. So here's the GitHub page. We posted this up on our GitHub account, and this is open source. So we're continuously developing it and expanding it. It's well documented. It has examples. It doesn't necessarily have to be used with Angular 5. You can also leverage older versions of Angular, but not AngularJS, which is the 1.x branch. So I'm just going to quickly jump into an example here. So this is a bit of what a complicated JSON schema looks like for adding a vehicle. So you can see that we're not specifying a form anywhere. What we're saying is these are the fields, these are the requirements, and then this gets produced on the other end. So taking the example that I've had of the PowerPoint, we simply paste this in here, and now we have a new form. So based on what's required here, we can try and submit this, but it's not going to work. And then we just go in, put some data in, and now we get the data. So this data can be validated client side, and then it's submitted to the API, which has this schema in the back end to do its own validation. So already we've reduced our workload on the front end by probably 90%, because we're not coding the forms, we're not concerned about the validation. This plugin also takes the data back in for editing, so it speeds up our workflow, prototyping, and our MVPs. So what's the future of this is working with open standards is good. As a team, we're working off a well-developed standard that's now in version 7. So it reduces our communication time and discussion regarding features that have already been decided by a much larger community and the committee. Open source tools. Right now we just have an Angular version up there, but we're also looking to put up iOS, Swift, iOS and Android versions as well. And we're going to be continuously maintaining this. So the benefit of so the license is MIT, so it's free for anyone to use. And the benefit of a larger organization maintaining is we can put resources and then put them back into our life cycle. And like I said, better life without forms. Forms are probably the most tedious part of application development. There's a lot of work that goes into them. There's a lot of work that goes into supporting them, and it's not something that we have to do. It's better to focus on the business process and learning other things. So the NGX Trufla, with a question mark there, is a new project that's probably going to go up sometime soon. And it's a way to chain the schemas to produce more complex workflows. So what I presented so far is a single form, which can go a long way, but what we want to do is build further processes into it. So if you think about applying for a job on a big website, all the steps you have to go through, we want to make those flexible and configurable by the client. What I showed you with the schema, just editing it in the JSON editor, we're hoping to make that visual. So letting our clients use drag and drop tools to essentially create forms themselves. So it's Angular 5, like I said. And then, is this for you? So it seems like an overly, a lot of complex work for a simple problem, 1 or 2 forms. Once you start getting into more forms, you want to quickly develop applications. This is where this becomes useful, because at some point or another, you have to collect data. And that's it. Thank you. Yeah, so JSON schema out of the box has support for fairly basic types. So number, string, or integer, string, object, array, and boolean. So if we look at all the form data that we're collecting, we can generally fit the data type into one of those formats. On the user side, you may want to display a different field and how you capture that information. So one of the good things about Angular is we're leveraging their dependency injection to allow you to inject your own fields. So your own validations, your own fields, your own styles, and there's something else. Default values.
Okay, so it is very tied to Angular itself.
What's that?
Very tightly coupled with Angular. I can't use it right now with other libraries like React.
So this one you can't. In the future, they're talking about interoperability between the 2 libraries. This is more of a way to present the new concept of thinking about forms and dynamic data. React has a really good library out there, actually, financed or sponsored by Mozilla. And they do the exact same thing, generate forms out of JSON schema. I don't know if Vue has something. In the Angular space, I've seen one in the Angular JS space. The one that was developed for Angular 4 was tightly coupled to a few other libraries used for validation, and the way they weren't really using the built-in validations and using the built-in reactive forms. So we wrote our own to leverage as much of the native framework as we can. More questions?
In a large application, like an e-commerce application, in the client side, does you request all the schemas for the app, or you request the schema per view?
So we request schemas per view. So it's all lazy loaded on the Angular side. So before we say go into an edit or an add, we will pre-request a schema and feed it into the plugin. What? Should I load it up? I don't know.
Question. Is it possible for me to validate against other fields?
Is it possible for you to validate against other fields?
Other values.
Other
Other values in the C code. For example, I request from the user to enter his email, and according to his email, I will validate in other fields.
Oh, so like dependencies or email?
Like matching password. Yeah.
Oh, matching password. Yeah. So that's where that custom validation injecting comes in. So you could say, one of the benefits of Angular in the plugin itself is it allows you to inject processes on submit, on change, and cancel. So standard form operations have a two-way binding to your application. So during on change or on submit, you can do your own custom validations, or you could inject that validation directly into the plugin. And Angular injections are really neat and really easy to do. So they follow a standard way of building a validation, and then we simply bind it to the field type. For styling, we use CSS Wizardry quite a bit, which is based on Flex. So it gives us quite a lot of ability of styling forms. And one of the benefits of it too is we don't necessarily want everybody styling their own forms.
السلام عليكم. انا عاوز اعمل الفورم بتاعتي هتكون فيها ايفنت وان انا سلكت فاليو معينه باقي الفيلدز اللي تحت تتغير بناء على الفاليو. فهل لو انا عاوز اعمل ايفنت ده هيكون بوسيبل ولا هيكون عاوز هو مثلا انا هفترض مثلا انا بختار تايب معين عندي سلكت فيها تايب اللي هو مثلا وليكن ميل وسيفيل فالميل هيبقى ليه فيلدز مختلفه عن الفيلدز بتاع
كاسكيد فيلدز يعني مثلا زي بيختار الميك والموديل والير بتاع العربيه مثلا فلو اختار الميك هيظهر له فاليوز dependencies in fields like for example if you select gender it's male or female and then if you select male something happened if you select female something else happened.
Yeah, so I'll go back to my example here. So we use this as a standard to kind of go back to, and one of them is the conditional control here. So built into the JSON schema, if you go through it, is this concept of one-off. So if you like pizza, then also pizza type is required. As far as hamburger, you have to pick your meat. So if I select pizza, it's going to ask me for a pizza type. And if I select a hamburger, it'll ask me for type of meat. So, like I said, there's a lot of things built into the schema that have been thought out over 7 versions. And if you're interested in this, I highly encourage you to visit their GitHub pages, especially their issues forum, because that's where they discuss things like dynamic data injection. Like what happens, for example, make model year. Those are things that if someone selects Toyota, we load up different models and we load up different years. So we have our own data tag that we've put in there so we can do dynamic retrievals. But you have to be careful how much you do in a single library so it doesn't grow out of control. One of the other things that we do support out of the schema is a concept of definitions. So rather than repeating a field over and over, so let's just say work address and business address, we can create a single address field and reuse it for definitions. And so all of the things that we could possibly do have been thought out ahead of us. And then for things that are not, it's less meetings and less things we have to document. Thank you.
انا هفرجكم دلوقتي يعني عشان تفهموا برضه احنا الموديول ده بنستخدمه في ايه عشان نحط الموضوع في الكونتكست بتاع البيزنس بقى واحنا ليه فكرنا ان احنا نبني حاجه زي كده. احنا في الانشورنس عندنا اي برودكت انشورنس بنحتاج نسال اسئله كتير للكلاينت وكان كل الويب سايتس اللي بنلاقيها كانوا بيفتح لك كده صفحه فيها 20 سؤال او 50 سؤال وطبعا اغلب اليوزرز اول ما بيفتحوا البيج ديت وبيشوفوا حاجه زي كده بيتخضوا ويقفلوا على طول البيج ومش بيكملوا السايكل بتاعها. فاحنا ابتدينا نفكر لما بنعمل اي حاجه ان احنا نعملها ستيبس. وده كان ويب سايت من الويب سايتس اللي احنا بنيناه لحد من الكلاينتس عندنا. ده بيبيع انشورنس للكوميرشال. يعني ايه كوميرشال؟ يعني انشورنس للناس اللي هم مثلا اذا كان محاسب، محامي، كهربائي، شغال في المعمار، انشورنس عشان وهو شغال لو حصلت له حاجه يبقى كفر. فكل الاسئله اللي بتيجي بعد كده مبنيه على الاول انت شغال ايه. فكان الويب سايت ده في الاول قبل ما نعمل له ريبيلد كان كله بيسالك كل الاسئله في صفحه واحده. فاحنا لما جينا نقسمه لستبس بعد كده، ودي الحته اللي كان بيتكلم عليها بورس ان احنا محتاجين نعمل لها سبورت في الموديول اللي جاي وفي الفيرجنز اللي جايه، ان احنا ازاي كمان نبني دايناميك ستيبس مش بس وان فورم. ده اللي احنا ماشيين. بس حاليا مثلا دايما تيجي تكتب مثلا انا شغال الكتريشن مثلا او الكترونكس ستور مثلا، بعدين بتدوس كونتينيو، فبيبتدي يسالك اي حاجه، ايه مثلا الكومباني نيم بتاعتك، رقم التليفون. كل دي تعتبر ستيبس مبنيه على مبني عليها البيزنس لوجيك، لان احنا في الاخر بندي لك سعر الانشورنس المفروض بيكلفك كام، وتقدر كمان تشتريه من الويب سايت. مثلا بوستال كود، معلش البوستال كود كلها كانت بعدين بيبتدي يسالك دي الستبس بقى اللي احنا بنتكلم فيها. احنا حاليا بانيين بالجيسون سكيما كل ستيب لوحدها، بس الهاند اوفر من ستيب للثانيه هو ده اللي لسه حاليا مبني عندنا ستاتيك في الانجلر، بس احنا ناويين ان شاء الله حتى ده ننقله يبقى مكتوب بالجيسون سكيما، بحيث ان احنا كل ده يبقى عندنا في الداتا بيز. يعني لو حبينا نغير اي حاجه، لو الكلاينت جه حب يغير البيزنس فلو او يشيل اسئله او يحط اسئله من المسج فرونت اند، خلاص كل اللي بنعمله ندخل نعمل كونفيجريشنز بتغير اللوجيك بتاع